Hello and welcome back to another Blurble Reasoning. So soon after the last one, you know what that means? Fish? No, not fish. It means I just finished another Cosmere? Ooh, I just finished another Cosmere novella. And I'm feeling very suave about it. Now, I just read The Emperor's Soul and also The Hope of Elantris, which we'll throw in a couple of words about at the end of this video too, why not? But yeah, I own Arcanum Unbounded, I'm making my way through the Cosmere, I plan on reading everything that's currently around, and so it was time to go back to Cell and read The Emperor's Soul. I knew a little bit about this novella before I started. I knew it was set on Cell, and I knew that it was about rewriting an object's past and potentially rewriting a person's past. Without giving spoilers, I've also seen this power in use elsewhere in the Cosmere, and I knew where it came from when I saw it there. I also knew that The Emperor's Soul had won the Hugo Award for Best Novella of 2013, I believe it was. So, I won't lie, I did go in with some fairly high expectations, which is perhaps a little bit foolish because it's an arbitrary award show giving out an award, which, you know, Sanderson probably deserves plenty of those since he's written this, and he hasn't had them, so I don't know. But all the same, it lived up to the hype in my eyes. I think The Emperor's Soul is a fantastic novella, and of course, one of the great things about it is you don't need to know anything about the world of Cell or Elantris. There's only a couple of passing mentions. This could be your first Brandon Sanderson read, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people do recommend it as the first read, because, like, you know, it's less of a time investment than something like Mistborn Book 1. It's better written and more modern Brandon Sanderson writing than something like Elantris itself. It's short, and it's just really tight. It's really tightly written. The thing everyone talks about with Brandon Sanderson is magic systems, and that's certainly, you know, to be found here. We learn all about forgery and how that works with the stamp system, and I think it's a really cool idea, by the way. I love the logic rules, it feels like, in regards to, like, oh, you know, yeah, I could forge something to be anything, but it's got to be plausible. People have got to believe it. The object itself has got to believe that it can be that thing, or it won't stay for like more than a minute. And something I think is really clever is how over the course of this novella, which is mostly set in a single room, we see how Shy has these little side projects to do while she keeps her mind occupied with the main project. So she's been forging the table to be a nicer table, she's been forging the walls to have like nice wallpaper on and stuff, and it's all because the table might have been carved by this other person, the walls might have been painted by this person who actually stayed in the room above. And one of the Emperor's advisors, Gautona, has a really fun character arc where he starts being really frustrated by Shy, saying she's got so much talent and she's wasting it on forging when she could just be an artist in her own right, etc. And we're talking full spoilers here, just in case. This is your warning. But by the end of the novella, he has seen the artistry of forging itself, and you know, there's this moment where he gets absolutely frustrated that Shy stole a work of art and threw it in the fire and destroyed it forever, and eventually that's what he ends up doing with her work, with the you know, the book she wrote on the Emperor's Soul. He ends up throwing it in the fire and destroying it forever because it's what the artist would have wanted, just like why Shy did it. That's such a fun little character progression. It was really fun to watch unfold, and I love, you know, this idea of trying to forge the Emperor's Soul itself, learning about him, trying to collect every scrap of detail about him from his private diary and from the people who knew him and all of this. And there's this idea that it can never be 100% accurate, because not only do you need to grasp the essence of a person beyond what even they could see in themselves, but you need to grasp things which no one would know about that person. And I love how Shy's been, you know, imprisoned and forced to work on this, and her life is in danger. But at the same time, as an artist, she becomes so invested in her work that when she escapes, she still goes to stamp the Emperor and make sure it works. And we can see just how convincing her final work is, because it is a masterpiece. And yet at the end of the story, we hear about about how, like, maybe it's not 100% accurate. He's definitely acting a bit like he would have more like 10 years ago. But then we find out that's kind of intentional too. We find out that the true mastery of this forgery is the extremely subtle nudge to get him to go back and read his own journals again, to discover who he used to be, to try and help him realize that he should be a better emperor. But we also hear from Frava, from her point of view at the end of this, about how she had been having meetings with the emperor and how he was probably going to have Galtona executed, or assassinated, I guess I should say. And those meetings were so secret that there is no way that Shai could ever have known to imprint that impetus in his soul, and so now Frava has to start that process of convincing him all over again. But yeah, I don't have too much else to say about this other than just how solid it is. If I had to find a criticism with it, it would probably be that I don't know if I needed the extended escape sequence at the end where Shai shows off how the rewriting of her own soul works by stamping herself to be a martial artist, and we see what that's like from her POV. That was cool, and I understand why that was in here, and I don't necessarily have a problem with showing that off, but just I loved the bottle episode feel of the narrative, and honestly, I would have believed that she escaped when she did after meeting the Emperor, and I don't really think I needed all of the action sequence. I was kind of like, yeah, the story's done. I feel like we're just kind of lingering here, you know. But yeah, to touch very quickly on the other thing I wanted to mention, The Hope of Elantris, the short story, because I am reading through Arcanum and Bounded, which is why I'm lumping these two together. I'm not going to make a whole video for a short story, if you know what I mean. The Hope of Elantris focuses on the point of view. I mean, first of all, the framing narrative is that it's Ash is telling Raoden about it after the events of the main novel of Elantris. And I find it really weird because Brandon Sanderson mentions that this story takes place after the events of Elantris, but it doesn't. Like, the framing device does, but the actual story itself takes place during the end of Elantris, unless I misheard him. And because of that, unfortunately, I spent the first third of this short story just being super disoriented because it's been a few months and a few books since I read Elantris, so I was really disoriented. I was like, wait, where are we in the timeline? What's happening? Like, and the other side of it was, why are we telling this story? This story answers a question that I never asked or thought to ask, and yeah, I didn't find it particularly thrilling. By the end of it, I appreciated it, don't get me wrong. It was nice to have this little extra chapter. It very much felt like cut content, and technically it wasn't because it hadn't been written, but it was something that Brandon in the postscript said that, like, he knew that this was happening, he just didn't really have a place to fit it in the narrative. But yeah, maybe if I had read this immediately after Elantris, I would have enjoyed it more. It was also, unfortunately, a little bit of a curveball having it narrated by Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, because before, the original Elantris audiobook was narrated by someone else, and they pronounced most of the names very differently. You know, Raoden becomes Royden or something. The Shaod becomes like the Shade. The Hoed becomes the Hode, you know? Serene becomes Serene. So I'm spending a little bit of brain function as well, going, wait, who? What? Huh? People sound differently when they talk, you know, yeah. But, you know, it was fun. The postscript talked about the backstory of that short story, and I think I enjoyed that a little bit more than the story itself, because it was very wholesome. Also, one last thing I want to mention here about the world of Cell itself, because I did read this through Arcanum Unbounded, and it did have that little intro section with some really interesting lore for Cell, by the way. And skip ahead a little bit if you don't want to hear this yet, but we learn that the two shards that helped create Cell were destroyed during humanity's prehistory on that world, and that the investiture soaked into the land itself, which is probably, and this is more for speculation territory, probably why the rune system works the way that it does, and why the stamp system that we see in the Emperor's Soul is able to work on objects. The idea of objects having souls, I think, is probably a thing native to Cell. But yeah, I really like that concept, and that makes a lot of sense sense for the magic systems of that world alone, and it makes me really excited to consider what other differences other worlds within the Cosmere might have in terms of magic and the origins of it, and how that can shape the use of it. Also, one little lore tidbit that I found really interesting about the world of Cell itself was its size. It's 1.5 Cosmere standard, which means it's like a little bit bigger than most worlds, and because of that, there are 3 empires who for the most part do not interact with each other, and so I think we've seen 2 of them now. I wonder about the 3rd one. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the Emperor's Soul and the Hope of Elantris. My Cosmere checklist is getting really nice and green over here now. I've got, just to keep you updated on what I've read through, and this isn't like a reading order that everyone should go and use, by the way. This is just what made sense in my mind after I consulted several different reading orders. But ticked off now, we have Elantris, the Hope of Elantris, the Emperor's Soul, Warbreaker, the Final Empire, the Well of Ascension, the Hero of Ages, the 11th Metal, the Alloy of Law, Allomancer Jack, Shadows of Self, the Bands of Mourning, Mistborn Secret History, and the Lost Metal. And then in lighter green to indicate they need rereading, the Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. Also, what I just presented to you is not the order even I read it in. So there you go. And then ahead of me, my rough reading order is Shadows for Silence, whatever the full title of that is. It didn't fit in my spreadsheet. Also, the White Sand Omnibus. I don't know where I'm going to fit that in. But that kind of like exits the kind of pre-Stormlight, Arcanum Unbounded kind of era in my mind, and then we go into The Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, Edge Dancer, Oathbringer, Dawn Shard, Rhythm of War, The Sunlit Man, Wind and Truth, Tress of the Emerald Sea, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, and Isles of the Ember Dark. Some of those secret project novels and novellas might need to be shuffled around a bit. I will research a little more as I get there, but I'm very excited to be on what feels like the back half of the Cosmere. I know 5 Stormlight books is going to be a project of reading upon itself that may take a year or more based on my reading speeds, but I've got to where I currently am a lot faster than I was expecting, and that's very exciting to me. So stick around for thoughts on all of those books, and I will catch you in whatever I make next.